You suck with Skrolk. Admit it. Go on, admit it now, or I'll be forced to wrestle your dad again. And today I'm going to tell you why. Have you lost your Liber Bubonicus? Has Nurglich turned his back on you? Well, don't worry. Your friend, the Blake-horned rat, is here to look after you. And today we'll be diving deep into why you suck with Skrolk, the Skaven, and Clan Pestilens as a faction. After today's video, you'll be called Clan Pestilens. My name is Blake and I bid you my fondest welcome to Blake's Takes, where today I'll be giving you my take on why you're just awful with Skrolk. Is my take hot or not? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed today's video, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps the channel out. But first, there is an urgent message for you on the far squeaker from the Blake-horned rat.
My people, sons and daughters of Pestilens, for many years we have been a broken nation, shunned, oppressed, and conquered by those we sought to escape. 2 years ago, I asked for time, and that time was granted by you. You, the strength in my arm, the holders of my dreams. Our forefathers embarked on the greatest exodus in the history of all skaven kind. An exodus for freedom. Lustria became that freedom. Our new world changed our bodies. At first, it weakened us, but in fact, we were growing stronger. In the time you have given me, I have rebuilt our nation. I have rebuilt our strength. And I have rebuilt our pride. Our enemies at home have been re-educated. We have given them new insights into our cause. Defenders of the Pestilens dream, now is our time!
Reason you suck with Skrolk. Number 1. You lack patience with plagueclaws. Plagueclaw catapults are absolute powerhouses of units. This terrifying weapon of war will be your win condition at the start of your campaign. But on the harder difficulties, the AI is adept at dodging the smelly green blobs you fire at them. So this is why you need to exercise patience with your plagueclaws. Use your Menace Below summons to tie up the enemy as they advance to give you some easier shots to land. Summon your Menace Belows to the sides of enemy units that you want to focus, so your Plagueclaw catapults have an easier time hitting their intended target.
Nice.
Skinks are naturally very quick on their feet, so do try and prioritise the Saurus warriors who are much slower and much easier to hit. This is useful to know at the beginning of your campaign before your Plagueclaws have racked up enough experience to be very accurate. So take your time and play around the Plagueclaw. Make sure that they have the best angles possible to deliver their payload onto the enemy. Reason you suck with Skrolk. Number 2. You don't know where to go. Skrolk has one of the hardest starting factions to fight. But don't worry, your old pal Blake is here for you. Now, after you take your initial starting province, you might be tempted to go after the Southern Sentinel's capital city as your next target. This is a mistake. Your forces will really struggle to take this city in these opening turns. Not only does it have a hefty garrison with a big dinosaur in it, but it's also got another army garrisoned in there. Instead, hire yourself another lord at the end of turn 1. Make sure he is a warlord. You will need a stout, by Skaven standards, single entity for the battles to come. Have you and your second lord both move to Chupiatl instead. Take the time to recruit some more forces. Try to prioritise getting spear infantry, like clan rats with spears or skaven slaves with spears. Then attack and take Chupiatl. What you will notice in the next turn is the Southern Sentinels have moved their garrison army from the Southern Sentinels' walled city down to the Mangrove Coast, so now you can pick off this force far easier, as the Mangrove Coast doesn't have a wall and a scary dinosaur inside of it. Divide and conquer, my beautiful audience. Take the Mangrove Coast and slaughter the reptile things that dwell within. Now, force march your second lord as far as he will go towards the Southern Sentinels' walled city. You'll notice that Skrolk is unable to reach the Southern Sentinels, but luckily you force marched your second lord as far as he can go, because he will be able to lay siege to the city. Now, the enemy will sally out, but we have no intention of fighting this battle in the field. We only want to lay siege to the enemy to prevent the new lord garrisoned in there from recruiting over the end turn. Now, next turn you'll be able to launch the assault with Skrolk. This is still a tough battle, but because you've leveled up your lizard killing game bashing those other cities, it will be a much more doable fight than an immediate rush. Firstly, ensure that both Skrolk and your Plague Priest hero have the Vermintide spell. This will help you drown the lizards in bodies when you finally assault the city. Hopefully you'll get a large amount of winds of magic. Secondly, make sure your plagueclaw catapults are turned off from fire at will to conserve your precious ammunition. Every shot they take needs to be meticulous and planned. The Sentinels will use the Holy Stellar ability, which reduces your accuracy, so you have to wait these out before using your catapults. You can provoke the enemy into using this ability by having the plagueclaws attack, then immediately stop firing. The AI will drop the ability down and it will be wasted. Now, whilst this is happening, zigzag Skrolk to the gates and try to avoid the majority of the skink javelins which will be peppering him. Get him to bash down the gate. Now, whilst he's bashing the gates, you want to look for targets with your plagueclaw catapults. As mentioned previously, your best targets are Saurus warriors, as they're slow and will churn through your rats faster than your mum churns through pizza rolls and cocaine. I hate Saurus. I hate them. I hate their lizard faces. Finally, the gates have been laid low and you need to storm the city. Because you were meticulous with your shots, the Saurus warriors will be battered, but you will still have an angry, large dinosaur to contend with. Now, this is why we picked up a Skaven warlord as your second lord. Get him onto the dinosaur and drown them in Skaven slave and clan rat spears. Skrolk and your Plague Priest can dip in and out to put some damage on the beastie, but don't leave them alone in there for too long, as they'll get slapped around pretty hard by this thing. Because you went and took the other regions of the province first, you now have more Menace Belows to play around with in the fight due to the Skaven corruption you've been spreading. Make sure to use your Vermintide abilities and Menace Belows to further drown the enemy lizards in fur and claws until they eventually break. Now, because you've been feasting on lizards elsewhere, you'll be able to dump a bit of food to level up the city. I recommend not going into the red with food to level this particular city up, because of the massive leadership debuff to your already cowardly forces, and you still have more big scary dinosaurs coming at you. You do ideally want to get that settlement up to at least level 3 though. This is so you can start pumping out your incredible weapons teams. With that, your starting enemy is beaten, and your opening provinces secured. But for how long?
What now?
What now? Let me tell you what now.
Reason you suck with Skrolk. Number 3. You don't trap 10-in-1. Shortly after conquering and enslaving the lizards of the Southern Sentinels, Lizard Moses will come and demand that you let his people go. Now, at this stage of the campaign, he will have accrued quite the fighting force, so your 2 fledgling armies will have their work certainly cut out for them. Lizards absolutely slaughter early game Skaven. There's just no getting around that, so you have to beat the enemy on the overworld campaign map. Tricksy ambushes are the order of the day to stop 10-in-1 in his tracks. Because these High Elves occupy the tip of Lustria, it is likely that 10-in-1 will make his attack through this narrow pass here. Have your second lord hold the line there, and have Skrolk set up an ambush next to him. Tehenhauin, or one of his armies, will stumble into your trap, giving you an easy auto-resolve to put you on an even footing. Then press on to attack and finish off their other army. If the ambush isn't successful, retreat your forces back and hope they run out of movement points. Then attack them again in stalk stance to potentially net another ambush. It's important to put points into the ancient cunning ability for all Skaven lords to maximise the chances of ambush success. With a reasonable amount of luck, you'll get a successful ambush to balance the scales, and then you can swarm over whatever is left of Tehenhauin's faction. Reason you suck with Skrolk. Number 4. You don't grind down Gor-Rok. Peace is precarious as Pestilens. This is why you must make rigorous preparations for your future conflicts. The Skaven are considered the ancient enemy to all things Lizardmen, so you will need to ensure you're ready to fight on multiple fronts when the situation arises. Oxyotl to the south and Gor-Rok to the north are your primary threats, and if you're not careful and prepared, they will sandwich you in a wall of muscle and lizard scales. Lizards thrash you on the field, so you need to think more strategically with Pestilens. Your Undercities and your Undercities alone have a secret weapon which can grind down the lizard hordes, the Grand Plague Cauldron, a device more disgusting than that time you saw your nan throwing up in her handbag. Gor-Rok of Itza will be your target for this diabolical device. Take a Warlock Engineer over to Quetza and establish an Undercity in there. Build the Grand Plague Cauldron and the murder holes to reduce the likelihood of discovery somewhat. This thing will belch out plagues throughout Gor-Rok's key province of Itza, ravaging his armies and his units periodically. It will also infect your capital and settlements around it, boosting your income dramatically. It's a very worthwhile investment. Get it built and watch Gor-Rok struggle for the rest of his faction's very short lifespan. This infernal device will buy you time whilst you deal with Oxyotl in the south. You can still sack the city of Quetza, but remember to leave it standing so the plague furnace can keep spewing out plagues whilst you're battling Gor-Rok. Only occupy the settlement when you're ready to pull the trigger and slay Gor-Rok's faction. Reason you suck with Skrolk. Number 5. You don't pump out Plague Priests. Plague Priests are incredible heroes which can summon up to 5 units of clan rats and 2 units of plague monks every battle. They are one of the best heroes in the game, and this is especially true with Clan Pestilens. Firstly, Clan Pestilens gets a lot of buffs to Plague Priests through Skrolk. The Plague Lord ability gives you a huge increase in Plague Priest recruit rank and allows you to recruit them everywhere. The Liber Bubonicus and the Rod of Corruption further amplify Plague Priests, so be sure to pick those up. For the Liber Bubonicus, the quest battle is quite easy. It's a horde of zombies, but you're ambushed, so don't bring siege weapons to this fight. They have dogs and bats which will target your siege weapon teams and destroy them. Simply swap your plagueclaw catapults out for more plague monks. A horde of plague monks will beat this fight with absolute ease. The Rod of Corruption fight is a bit tougher, as you have a high-level lizard enemy force to deal with. At this point, you should have access to Plague Monk's Censer Bearers, who will fare quite well against this force. Bring your siege weapons and Poisoned Wind Globadiers to get rid of any big dinosaurs they'll have. It's a harder fight, but you should be at a higher level in the game, where you have more tools to deal with the enemy. Now, with those taken care of, your Plague Priests will spawn in with immediate access to spells like Vermintide, which will make your new armies much more powerful. Every army should have a Plague Priest in there, so be sure to build Plague Buildings in all of your major settlements to increase the capacity of them at Tier 5. Your faction can build these far more cheaply than other Skaven factions, so get those monuments to rot built and unleash your poxes onto this world. Also, on the subject of Plague Priests, make sure you're using the Pestilence scheme Plague Priest summon to spread plagues onto your enemies. The priest will always spawn on Skrolk, so whenever Skrolk has enemies, or soon-to-be enemies nearby, see if you can't get a plague into a nearby settlement. Not only to wear down the threats, but also to give some pretty nice bonuses to any army with plague-related units within. Reason you suck with Skrolk. Number 6. You don't understand Skaven military doctrine. As I touched upon in Reason 3, the average Skaven unit will lose to basically any other race's equivalent unit in a fair fight. You need to remember this in every engagement. Skaven win by tipping the balance in their favour in the overworld campaign map. Force of arms alone will not carry the day. Your guile and cunning will, as you ambush enemies with overwhelming odds that are stacked entirely in your favour. Firstly, the Ancient Cunning skill is a mandatory pickup for all Skaven lords. This increases your ambush success chance dramatically. No ifs, no buts. Get this skill maxed on every Skaven lord you have. On the overworld campaign map, you have to develop an understanding of how enemy armies are going to move and where you can intercept and ambush them. Typically, my Skaven armies will travel in pairs. One army filled with the most powerful Skaven units I can field, and another trashier army filled with clan rats and Skaven slaves. It will still have some artillery in there because you still want the force to be able to do some damage when it has to fight, but this trashier army is your bait force that you keep out of ambush stance and the enemy AI will think it's easy pickings. The more powerful force you keep in ambush stance over the end turn. You then spring your trap for easy victories. Fighting fairly should not be in your vocabulary. Study the AI closely. Try to predict where they're sending their armies so you can intercept them with overwhelming numbers and firepower. They will naturally gravitate towards your settlements and bait armies. All you need do is spring the trap. With the Skaven, remember ABBA. Always be ambushing. Reason you suck with Skrolk. Number 7. You don't know how your armies work. The Skaven have a lot of tools to get the job done. Knowing which tools to bring and when to bring them will save you a lot of trouble in your campaigns. So in this guide, I'm going to show you how your armies work and how to get the most value out of them in the field. Now, the Skaven golden rule, which I mentioned earlier, is your forces lack parity with other factions. Nowhere is this more apparent than with your melee infantry. Even your high-tier infantry is fragile and prone to leadership breaks. So how do you support them? Well, you let other expendable rats take the brunt of the damage. So this is where your plague priests come in. Spam vermintides out so disposable units of clan rats take the brunt of damage, from charging cavalry and monsters to missile fire. This will protect your front line from damage, whilst also crucially giving your ranged units and artillery more time to fire. I have at least one plague priest per army, but try and get 2. They're that useful. Make sure to pick up warpstone tokens on your plague priests so they have plenty of winds of magic to play with. Skaven artillery and weapons teams are where your faction truly shines. You have ranged weapons for every job. For the Lizardmen, Poisoned Wind and Death Globe bombardiers are amazing. Not only do they annihilate blobs of infantry, no matter how elite they are, they also do extreme damage to single entities and large units. When fighting the Lizardmen, don't leave home without them. They've saved me more times than I can count. Any faction with a heavy emphasis on melee will learn to fear these units. However, your Globadiers have a very pronounced weakness, and that's their range. When going up against ranged heavy factions such as the Wood Elves, you want to swap these guys out for units like plagueclaw catapults, mortars, or warplock Jezzails, things which have a good range and can chew through infantry quickly. Jezzails are very good because they've also got a silver shield, so they can fight other skirmishers exceptionally well. Now, your monsters and large units are pretty decent, but they do lack armour, so will take a lot of punishment very quickly. Make sure ranged units aren't attacking them. Packmasters are great for keeping these units in the fight, and on the rare occasions you're outmatched for artillery, they can spawn in wolf rats to kill artillery crews. Whilst having low leadership is typically a bad thing, it actually serves a pretty useful purpose for the Skaven. It will be very rare that your units get fully wiped out, as they're too busy running away. So don't be afraid to toss your melee units into the fray. They will likely rout before they get fully wiped out. The Skaven are not a doom-stacking faction. There is no one unit on their roster which you can spam to guarantee success. You have to master Skaven combined arms to carry the day. At the release of this video, the fire at will bug still exists in the game. This is where your units will refuse to fire despite units coming into range. Even giving an attack order, they will refuse to fire. If this happens to you and you notice your units aren't firing, turn fire at will off and on again whilst the game is live. As in, don't pause the game. Just turn fire at will off and on again and then right click to give an attack order. It's a very annoying bug for any ranged heavy faction, so in the game's current state, I advise also making sure you have things that can do damage in melee, like Plague Monk Censer Bearers. They're very good at killing things in hand to hand, but they are very fragile, so don't let them get charged, and don't let missile units fire at them. They also have magic attacks, so they're very good at killing demons. Useful for when you're disposing of a certain Khornate faction close to you.
I just think they're neat.
Now, I just want to go over some examples of armies which I've used in this campaign. So we have a bit of an experimental army here. We have a whole bunch of various ogres coupled with plague monks. The second army is the bait army, lots of low tier infantry in there. Notice it still has artillery and globadiers in there because we would like it to do some damage when it has to fight. Deathglobe Bombardiers, fantastic unit. Then I have these warp fire throwers in this army, which I sort of just wanted to test out to see if they weren't shit anymore, and I can confirm that they're still pretty shit. Just too low range, and I didn't really rate the damage at all. Globadiers are just a better choice currently, I feel. The nice thing about monsters coupled with Plague Priests is that they share the same redline capstone skill, Mutagenic Elixirs, which gives them more armour and physical resistance at experience level 7, which is really handy for both of these units. A bit of an experimental army, it was pretty good against my Khornate adversary here. So onto this very thematic build for Skrolk, taking full advantage of his buffs to plague units, 60% upkeep reduction on plague priests, monks and catapults. You get 10% from the Plague Lord skill faction-wide and 50% from Skrolk's unique leader ability. More of a thematic build. I wouldn't say this is a particularly effective build, but it's really good against infantry, but it struggled against large units. It still performed and got the job done, but probably should have swapped out those mortars for something like Jezzail's or Warp Lightning Cannon. Poisoned Wind mortars are still really good. They're not quite as powerful as they used to be, but they're still a really solid unit and particularly effective in sieges. So I think I'd still miss them if I didn't have them. So this army here is a bit more specialised for anti-large. It has Storm Vermin with halberds, Jezzail's and Warp Lightning Cannons for an armour-piercing punch, and some Hell Pit Abominations. This force was invading Gor-Rok, so it was kitted out to deal with a lot of cavalry. Here's the baiting force alongside it. Note it still has artillery, so it can project some power, but it has a considerably weaker front line, so it'll look like easy pickings for an enemy. Interestingly, in this campaign, I really liked the Hell Pit Abomination, which is a real surprise to me, because it's always been a bit of a meme unit. But yeah, they're really tanky with their massive regeneration and hit pool, and pretty respectable damage. Also, your ranged units won't do too much damage to them, so they're just a very good distraction unit with great leadership. It's definitely seen some love recently because its performance was way better than I expected, so definitely a unit to watch out for in the future. What's curious about this campaign is that I didn't recruit any Rattling Gunners. Not a single one. I think I just prefer the Death and Poisoned Wind Globadiers. It's more burst damage, which I prefer. You could provoke leadership shocks better with that. They lob their grenades too, so they can send them right over the heads of your front line, and you're not going to run into the same sort of line of sight issues that you get with a Rattling Gunner in the forest. Play priests in both armies, obviously, for Vermintide and Plague Monk summons. Get some chaff out onto the field, good stuff. Packmasters to support the monsters, and engineers, really important hero. Boosts ranged units massively. You can see I'm slacking and I don't have an engineer in my bait force, which is poor form. I must have forgotten to put one in. An engineer should definitely be in this army too, so that's a mistake on my part. For more information on the Skaven and how to manage their economy, buildings and the ever-present threat of rebellions, please check out my Clan Eshin guide in the top right-hand corner of your screen now. It's got a lot of good stuff in there which will further increase your mastery of the menace below. One point in that video which I now disagree with is the role of chieftains. In the Eshin campaign, clan barracks were very rare because of my heavy focus on Eshin units like knight and gutter runners. Chieftains are actually a very solid hero choice, and it's definitely worth getting a few level 3 clan barracks to get a few of them out. They can actually do a lot of damage to large units when they have the Colossal Strike ability active, which will be very helpful against your many lizard enemies. Storm Vermin with halberds are also a solid pickup against the Lizardmen, so it's definitely worth putting down a few of these to ramp up production. Eshin units don't really play much of a role in my Pestilens armies. I think whilst they can do a lot of damage, they're also very fragile and require a lot of micro, so I tend to go for more conventional frontline troops when playing the Skaven outside of Clan Eshin. So that's why you suck with Skrolk. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps the channel out. And I want to give a massive shout out to my Patreon supporters: D, Joshua Krager, Dinkle250, Gonk, Little Horus, Hatoris Kurz, Bongos McDongos, and Jelly. I've been Blake, delivering my take. Thank you all so much for watching.